A simple act of kindness. It was a chilly afternoon when James was driving down the quiet street. He had just finished a long day at work and was looking forward to a peaceful evening at home. His mind was set on the comfort of his couch and a hot cup of tea. But fate had other plans for him that day. As he turned the corner, he saw a woman standing next to her car by the side of the road. The hood was up, and the woman looked frustrated. Her face was worried, and she was trying to wave down passing cars. James noticed that there were no other cars in sight, and the woman seemed to be struggling. His first instinct was to keep driving. After all, it wasn't his problem, and he was tired. But something inside him stopped him. James had always been the kind of person who believed in helping others, no matter how small the act. He turned his steering wheel to the side and pulled over next to her. As he stepped out of his car, the woman looked up, surprised and relieved to see someone stopping. She quickly walked towards him, her face lighting up with hope. "Oh, thank you. I've been trying to get help for the past half hour, but no one has stopped. I think my tire is flat," she said, pointing to the flat tire on the passenger side. James smiled. "No problem. Let me take a look." He had changed a tire before, so he knew exactly what to do. The woman stood back and watched as he opened his trunk, pulling out the tools he needed. She was clearly grateful, but James could see she was still a little nervous, perhaps unsure if he was really going to help or just pass by. As he worked, he tried to make small talk with her to ease her nerves. "It's a nice day today, despite the wind," James said as he removed the lug nuts from the tire. The woman nodded, but there was still a worried look on her face. "I've had a tough day," she said quietly. "I lost my job recently, and now my car is broken down. It just feels like everything is going wrong." James paused for a moment, feeling a pang of sympathy for her. He didn't know what it was like to lose a job, but he could imagine how stressful it must be. "I'm sorry to hear that. Things have a way of getting tough sometimes, but you're doing your best. That's what counts," he said, tightening the new tire on her car. The woman gave him a grateful smile, her eyes softening. "Thank you. You don't know how much this means to me," she replied. James finished up quickly, making sure the tire was secure. He stood up, wiped his hands on a rag, and closed the trunk. "All done," he said, stepping back. "You should be good to go." She looked at him for a moment, her face filled with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You could have just kept driving, but you stopped. Most people wouldn't do that." James shrugged and smiled. "It's just a tire. I'm happy to help." The woman hesitated for a moment, and then she reached into her purse and pulled out a few bills. "Please, let me pay you for your time." "I insist," she said, holding out the money. James shook his head, laughing softly. "No need. I wasn't helping you for money. Just pay it forward if you can. Help someone else when you get the chance." The woman looked at him for a moment, clearly moved by his words. "I will. I promise," she said with a nod. She then smiled, looking him in the eyes. "Thank you again, really." James smiled back. "It's nothing. Take care of yourself." He watched her get into her car, start the engine, and slowly drive off. As she turned the corner, he stood there for a moment, feeling a small sense of pride. It wasn't a big gesture, but it was a good one. A simple act of kindness that had made a difference in someone's day. As James got back into his car, he couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was more significant than he had thought. It was just a flat tire after all. But the look in the woman's eyes, the relief in her voice, made him wonder if kindness could be more powerful than he realized. Perhaps he had made her day a little brighter. Perhaps that was enough. Little did James know, that simple act of kindness was only the beginning of something much bigger, something he could never have predicted. What he had done without a second thought would soon lead to a series of events that would change his life forever. But for now, James was content with the knowledge that he had helped someone in need. He smiled to himself and drove off, eager to get home and put his feet up. But in the back of his mind, a small voice wondered, what would happen next? A mysterious visitor. The next morning, James woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside his window. It was a quiet, peaceful day, just like any other. He stretched, yawning as he got out of bed. As he went about his morning routine, he felt a sense of contentment. The small kindness he had shown the day before seemed like it had made a difference, but it wasn't anything extraordinary. It was just a flat tire after all. The woman had thanked him, and that was enough. James made his coffee and sat down at his kitchen table, flipping through his phone as he sipped the warm drink. As he checked his messages, there was a sudden knock on his door. It was early, too early for anyone he expected. His first thought was that it might be a delivery or a neighbor needing something. He set his phone down and walked to the door, wondering who it could be. When he opened the door, he was shocked to see a man standing there in a black suit. The man was tall and had a serious look on his face. Behind him, a sleek black SUV was parked in the driveway. James blinked, confused. He didn't recognize the man, and he definitely hadn't been expecting anyone like this. "Can I help you?" James asked, trying to hide his confusion. The man looked him over for a moment before speaking. "I'm here on behalf of a woman you helped yesterday. Her name is Monica. She told me about the kindness you showed her. I need to speak with you." James was taken aback. The name Monica didn't sound familiar at all, but it clicked in his mind. Was she the woman with the flat tire? He had never asked for her name, but he certainly remembered her face. He hadn't expected to hear from her again, let alone have someone show up at his door like this. "I helped her with a flat tire yesterday," James said slowly, "but I didn't think I'd hear anything more about it. I mean, she seemed fine." The man nodded, his expression still serious. "She's fine. But this visit isn't just about your act of kindness. There's more to the story that you don't know. Please, may I come in?" James hesitated, his mind racing. This whole situation felt strange, but there was something about the man's demeanor that made him feel he had no choice. He stepped aside and allowed the man to enter. The last thing he wanted was to seem rude, but his curiosity was piqued. The man stepped into the living room and looked around briefly before turning back to James. "Thank you for letting me in. I understand this must all seem rather unusual to you, but what you did for Monica yesterday is part of a larger situation. I'm afraid I can't explain everything just yet, but I will say this. Your life is about to change." James felt a shiver run down his spine. "What do you mean? What's going on? Who are you?" The man didn't immediately answer. Instead, he reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a small envelope. He handed it to James, who took it cautiously. The envelope was plain, with no markings, but it was sealed tightly. James looked up at the man, feeling a sense of unease growing in his chest. "Open it," the man said. James slowly broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. The words were typed neatly, with no signature or name attached. It read, "Your kindness has set off a chain of events that will soon reveal itself. The woman you helped is not who she appears to be, and neither are the people she is connected to. The SUV outside is just the beginning. Be careful who you trust, James. You've made an enemy without knowing it." James felt his heart race as he read the note again. What was this? What kind of situation was he involved in now? He looked up at the man, his face pale. "What is this? What's happening?" The man gave a brief nod. "That's why I'm here. Monica is connected to a much larger issue, something you have no idea about. Helping her was the right thing to do, but it's going to bring attention to you, attention you're not prepared for. I don't want to scare you, but I need you to understand that things are changing." "Changing how?" James asked, his voice shaky. "What do you want from me?" The man's expression softened just slightly. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to warn you. We're all caught in something bigger than we realize. Trust me, you'll be hearing more about this soon." James didn't know what to think. The conversation was dizzying, and he still didn't have all the answers. but there was no denying the gravity in the man's words. He glanced again at the black SUV parked outside. What was going on? And why had Monica's simple act of kindness set off something so mysterious? The man turned to leave but paused at the door. "One more thing," he said. "Be careful who you speak to about this. Trust no one." And with that, he was gone. The door clicked shut behind him, and James was left standing there, holding the letter in his hand. His mind was racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had just stepped into a situation that was far bigger than he had ever imagined. Little did he know, the next few days would unfold in a way that would make his quiet, ordinary life seem like a distant memory. The unseen threat. James stood frozen in his living room, the strange man's warning echoing in his mind. Trust no one. The words had been so cold, so deliberate. His hands trembled slightly as he held the letter. He had always considered himself a good person, helpful, reliable, someone who went out of his way for others when they needed it. But this was something different. This was no longer just about helping a woman with a flat tire. This was something much bigger. He glanced around the room, feeling an overwhelming sense of unease. His home, his safe space, suddenly felt unfamiliar. The man in the black suit, the letter, the black SUV parked outside. It all felt surreal, like something out of a movie. But it was happening to him. James walked over to the window and peered out cautiously. The SUV was still there, parked in front of his house. Its tinted windows reflected the sunlight, but he couldn't see who was inside. Who were these people? And why had they singled him out? He had helped a woman. That was it. It didn't make sense. But then, as he stood there, the pieces began to fall into place. The mysterious SUV, the cryptic message, the warning, it was all too much to be a coincidence. He needed answers. Taking a deep breath, James walked back to the door and opened it. He glanced up and down the street. The neighborhood was as quiet as it always was. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but his instincts told him that wasn't the case. Something was about to happen, something that could change everything. He closed the door and leaned against it, thinking. He had no idea who this Monica was or why her story had brought this kind of attention to him. But one thing was clear. The woman wasn't just a stranger, and neither was the black SUV. There was something about her, something hidden beneath the surface. James knew he couldn't sit around waiting for things to unfold on their own. He had to find out more. But how? The man had said to trust no one, but that was easier said than done. He couldn't just ignore the situation. He had to act. But what could he do without making things worse? His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. James' heart skipped a beat. Who could it be now? He walked to the door cautiously, feeling his pulse quicken. He wasn't expecting anyone else, especially not after the strange visit he had just had. He glanced through the peephole and froze. There, standing on his doorstep, was a woman. She was tall, with dark hair, and dressed in an elegant black coat. She looked out of place in the quiet suburban neighborhood. But it wasn't her appearance that caught his attention. It was the look in her eyes. She seemed almost expectant. James hesitated. Should he open the door? The man in the suit had warned him to trust no one, but could he turn this woman away without knowing who she was or why she was here? Taking a deep breath, he unlocked the door and pulled it open. The woman smiled politely, but there was something unreadable in her gaze. She didn't introduce herself immediately. Instead, she glanced behind her, as if checking to make sure no one was watching. "Are you James?" she asked softly. James nodded cautiously. "Yes, I am. Can I help you?" The woman stepped forward slightly, her heels clicking against the floor. She seemed to be measuring her words carefully. "I'm Monica," she said, her voice smooth and calm. "I think we have some unfinished business to discuss." Monica. James' mind raced. This was the woman from yesterday, the one he had helped with the flat tire. But now, seeing her up close, he wasn't sure what to think. She didn't look dangerous, but something about her presence was unsettling. She was no ordinary person. Her demeanor was too composed, too controlled. "I don't understand," James said, stepping back slightly to let her in. "What is this all about? Why are you here? And why is there a black SUV parked outside my house?" Monica's gaze flickered to the window for a moment before returning to James. "I think you know more than you realize," she said quietly. "You've been dragged into something much bigger than you ever imagined. Helping me with that flat tire, it was the catalyst. You've become a part of a much larger story now." James felt a cold shiver run down his spine. "What do you mean? What kind of story? And who are these people?" His mind was swirling with questions, but she wasn't answering them. Monica took a deep breath. "I wish I could explain everything right now, but there are certain things you need to understand first. The people in that SUV, they're watching you. They've been watching you since yesterday. I don't have much time, so I need you to listen carefully. I need you to trust me, even if it feels impossible. The choices you make in the next few days will determine everything. Do you understand?" James was speechless. His heart was racing, and he could barely comprehend what she was saying. Trust her. After the man in the suit had warned him to trust no one. But something in Monica's eyes, something in her voice, made him feel like he had no choice. The situation was spiraling out of control, and he was in the middle of it. "I don't know what to believe anymore," James muttered, feeling overwhelmed. Monica nodded sympathetically. "I understand. But you have to believe me when I say that things are happening now that you can't stop. All you can do is survive. And together, we might just be able to find a way out." James didn't know what to say. All he knew was that his life was no longer his own. He had stepped into a world that was much darker and more dangerous than he had ever imagined. And he wasn't sure if he was ready for what was coming next. The mysterious SUV. James was still reeling from Monica's words as she stood in his living room, her eyes fixed on him, waiting for a response. He wasn't sure if he should believe her, but something in her serious tone told him that she wasn't just playing games. The world around him had suddenly shifted, and nothing seemed the same anymore. The black SUV outside his house wasn't just an innocent car. It was part of something much bigger, something he hadn't expected to be tangled in. The moment the door had closed behind Monica, James felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. She had barely given him a moment to process before continuing her cryptic explanation. "Who are they, Monica?" James asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He felt a cold lump in his throat. "The people in the SUV, what do they want with me?" Monica took a seat on the couch, folding her arms across her chest as if she were preparing for a long conversation. She studied James with a serious look, her face no longer soft and calm, but hard with a sense of urgency. "They're not here because of you," she began. "Not exactly, but because of the woman you helped." James' brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I just helped a woman with a flat tire. I didn't think it was anything special." Monica nodded, but there was a trace of sadness in her expression. "It wasn't just any woman. The woman you helped is part of something much more dangerous than you can imagine. She's connected to a network of people who are very powerful, people who don't take kindly to being helped by strangers. You've gotten caught in the middle of something." James shook his head, trying to wrap his mind around her words. "So you're saying that just by helping someone with a flat tire, I've gotten myself into trouble with a dangerous group of people?" It didn't seem possible. It didn't make sense. Yet here he was, facing the reality of it. Monica leaned forward, her eyes locked onto his, as if making sure he understood every word she was about to say. "Yes, exactly. And it's worse than just being in trouble. You've become a target, James. They're watching you right now." James' heart began to race again. He glanced out the window at the black SUV. It sat there, unmoving, just as it had been since the morning. His mind screamed at him to go outside and confront whoever was inside, to demand answers. But his feet felt like they were glued to the floor. How can I be a target? I don't even know these people, James said, his voice a little more frantic now. He ran a hand through his hair. Why me? What did I do? Monica's expression softened for a moment. It's not about what you did, James. It's about what you've become a part of by helping that woman. She's involved with a group that has connections everywhere, people in high places, and they won't stop until they get what they want. James tried to calm himself. But you said that they're not here because of me. Then what do they want? Monica hesitated, and James could see the conflict in her eyes. She was clearly struggling with how much to reveal. They're here because you're the key to something. You helped that woman, but there's more to her than meets the eye. And now they want to find out how much you know. James felt a shiver run down his spine. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing at the edge of something much darker, something that would change his life forever. But who could he trust now? Monica seemed genuine, but could she really be trusted? A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts, causing his heart to skip a beat. Both James and Monica froze, their eyes darting toward the door. The knock was sharp and deliberate, not like a neighbor stopping by to borrow sugar. It was more like a warning. James felt his pulse racing again as he slowly moved toward the door. His hand hovered over the doorknob, unsure if he should open it. He glanced at Monica, who looked just as nervous as he felt. Her eyes widened as if silently urging him not to answer. But the knock came again, louder this time. "Who is it?" James asked, his voice shaking slightly as he pressed his ear against the door. He had no idea who it could be. Was it the mysterious people from the SUV? Or someone else? Monica's expression grew darker. "Don't open the door. If you do, you'll be giving them exactly what they want." James looked back at her, confused and terrified. But who's on the other side? Who is it? Monica didn't answer immediately. Her gaze was fixed on the door, her face pale. She was holding her breath, as though afraid the people outside could hear her. Finally, she spoke, her voice a whisper. "It's them. The people from the SUV. They've come for you." James' mind raced. His body was frozen. His heart pounded in his chest, and his mind struggled to make sense of everything. This had gone from a simple good deed to something he could never have imagined in his worst nightmares. The knock came again, this time louder and more forceful. He had no choice. The situation had escalated. He was in too deep now. Slowly, James backed away from the door, turning toward Monica. "What do we do now?" Monica took a deep breath, her face grim. "Now you have to decide if you want to get out of this, because there's no going back once you open that door." James stared at the door, then back at Monica. He was trapped in something bigger than he understood, and whatever came next, he couldn't face it alone. The unlikely visitor. James could feel the tension in the room. The knock on the door echoed in his mind, making his heart race faster. Monica's words had only made things worse, amplifying the fear that had already settled in his chest. The people from the SUV were here, and they were after him. But why? What did they want? And why was it so important for them to find out more about the woman he had helped? As the minutes ticked by, James' anxiety grew. The seconds felt like hours. He stood frozen, staring at the door. He wanted to open it and find out who was there, but Monica's warning kept replaying in his mind. "Don't open the door. They've come for you." "Monica," James whispered, his voice trembling. "What should I do? Should I answer it?" Monica's eyes were wide with fear. She took a few steps back, as if to put some distance between herself and the door. Her voice was barely audible as she said, "You can't let them in, James. I'm not sure what they'll do if you do." James swallowed hard, his throat dry. He wanted to trust Monica, but everything seemed so confusing. He had never been in a situation like this before. He was just an ordinary man who had done a simple act of kindness, helping a stranger with a flat tire. And now, his life was on the line. The knock came again, louder this time, more urgent. Without thinking, James stepped away from the door. He was about to head for the back door when he heard a voice from the other side. "James," the voice called. It was deep, calm, and smooth, but there was an underlying sense of authority in it that made James' skin crawl. "We know you're in there. We need to talk." James froze. His breath caught in his throat. They knew his name. How? How could they possibly know him? It didn't make sense. He had never seen them before. He had only helped that woman with the flat tire. And now this. "Don't open the door," Monica repeated, but her voice was starting to crack with fear. "You don't know who they are, James. They're dangerous." James was torn. Every instinct told him not to open the door, but something about the voice on the other side made him hesitate. The calm, assured tone didn't seem like the voice of a man looking to harm him. It almost sounded like someone who was used to getting what he wanted, someone who knew how to control situations. He glanced at Monica, who was staring at the door with wide, terrified eyes. She wasn't going to be of much help if the people on the other side forced their way in. James had to think for himself. He had to make a choice. After what felt like an eternity, the door swung open. James didn't know why he did it. He couldn't explain it to himself. But the next moment, he found himself facing a man standing on his doorstep. He was tall, well-dressed, and exuded an aura of power. He was wearing a black suit, and his face was expressionless, like he had seen it all before. The man didn't say a word at first. He just stood there, looking at James with cold, calculating eyes. Behind him, the black SUV remained parked on the street, its tinted windows reflecting the dim light of the street lamps. "James," the man said again, his voice low and measured. "We've been looking for you." James felt his heart race as he stared at the man. "What do you want from me? Why are you here?" His voice wavered, but he was trying to sound as confident as possible. He needed answers, and he needed them now. The man stepped closer, his eyes never leaving James' face. "We need you to come with us. There are things you don't understand, things that can't be explained here." Monica's voice cut in, her words shaking with fear. "James, you can't go with them. They're not who they say they are. Please, don't trust them." James turned toward her, his mind racing. He wanted to help her understand, but he was too confused himself. Who was this man? What did he mean by things you don't understand? What could possibly be so important that they had come all the way here to find him? The man, seeing James' hesitation, smiled just slightly, but it was a cold, almost predatory smile. "You don't have a choice, James. They know what you did. And now you're part of something much bigger than you could have ever imagined." James' pulse quickened. This was the moment. Everything was changing. There was no going back now. He had helped someone, a stranger in need. But now, it seemed as if that simple act had turned his world upside down. The man took another step forward. "We'll make this easy for you. You can come with us peacefully, or we can make you come. The choice is yours." James looked at Monica, who was now standing behind him, shaking with fear. He knew he had to make a decision. But how could he choose between the unknown and the unknown? He looked back at the man in the black suit, his heart pounding. "What do you want from me?" James asked, his voice filled with urgency. The man's smile faded, and his tone turned more serious. "We want you to help us find out more about the woman you helped. She's not who you think she is. And if you want to protect yourself, and everyone around you, you'll come with us." James' stomach dropped. He had no idea what he had gotten himself into, but one thing was clear: nothing would ever be the same again. The simple act of helping a woman with a flat tire had opened a door to a world of secrets and danger. And now he was stuck in the middle of it all. "Make your choice, James," the man said, his voice growing colder. James took a deep breath. His life was no longer in his hands, and he knew, whatever happened next, he wouldn't be able to turn back. The mysterious truth unfolds. James stood frozen, his heart hammering in his chest as he stared at the man in the black suit. The pressure was unbearable. The world seemed to narrow around him. The man's words echoing in his mind like a constant buzz. He had never imagined that a simple act of kindness, something as harmless as helping a woman with a flat tire, would lead to this. His entire life was being turned upside down. He turned briefly to Monica, whose face was filled with dread. Her eyes were wide, filled with a mix of fear and disbelief. She wanted to say something, but no words came out. She was as helpless as he felt. The man standing before him, calm and confident, was a stranger who knew far too much about James, and James had no idea why. The man in the suit cleared his throat and took another step forward, his cold eyes never leaving James. "You're not in control here, James," he said softly, his voice like a velvet blade. "But you can make this easier for yourself. Come with us, and we'll explain everything." James didn't respond. He couldn't. His mind was spinning, trying to process everything. He looked again at Monica, who was still standing behind him, gripping the doorframe as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. "What do you mean, you know about her?" James finally found his voice. His throat was dry, and the words came out more like a question than a demand. "Who is she, really? What's going on?" The man's lips curled into a tight smile. "We know a lot about her, and that's why you're in danger. She's not who she says she is, James. She's a part of something bigger, a dangerous organization that we've been tracking for a long time. Helping her wasn't a simple favor. It was an invitation into something much darker." James felt a chill run down his spine. His mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. The woman he had helped, was she really a part of something dangerous? How could he have known? He had only seen her as a stranger in need, nothing more. "The woman I helped," James said slowly, his voice trembling slightly. "She was just a person stranded on the road. Nothing special. I didn't know anything about her." The man's expression darkened. "That's what you think. But the truth is far more complicated. We've been keeping an eye on her. And now that you've gotten involved, you're part of this whether you like it or not." James felt his stomach tighten. He couldn't comprehend what was happening. "Who are you?" he demanded, stepping back, trying to distance himself from the man's intimidating presence. "What do you want with me?" The man gave him a measured look, as though deciding how much to reveal. "My name doesn't matter right now. What matters is that you've crossed a line. You were just trying to help someone, but now you're entangled in something dangerous. You can either help us, or you can continue to be in the way." Monica finally spoke, her voice weak but firm. "James, don't listen to him. This is wrong. We don't know who these people are, but I've seen enough to know they can't be trusted." The man in the suit's gaze flicked to Monica briefly, before turning back to James. "You're right about one thing," he said coldly. "You don't know who we are, but you'll learn soon enough. There's no escaping it now." James took a shaky breath, his hands clenched into fists. The weight of the situation was beginning to crush him. He had no choice but to play along for now, to understand what was really going on. But one thing was clear. Whatever was happening, it had gone far beyond a simple act of kindness. He had unknowingly stepped into something much larger and more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. "Why me?" James asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why did you come for me?" The man's lips twisted into a half-smile, as if this was exactly what he'd expected. "You helped her, James. You're involved now. And we need you to help us stop what's coming next." James shook his head. "Stop what? What's coming? I don't understand." "You will," the man said, his tone chilling. "Sooner than you think." James' pulse quickened as the man turned, motioning toward the black SUV still parked outside. The tinted windows seemed to reflect the faint glow of the streetlights, casting an eerie shadow. The man in the suit looked over his shoulder, his eyes narrowing. "You can come with us now, or we can make this much harder for you," he said, his voice now laced with authority. James glanced at Monica one more time, her face pale with fear, before he turned back to the man. He knew he couldn't stay in his house, not with everything that was happening. The walls seemed to be closing in around him. The man had made it clear. He was part of something bigger, and if he didn't go with them, the consequences could be worse than anything he could imagine. With a deep breath, James made a decision. He didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. He needed answers. He couldn't live in fear and uncertainty forever. "I'll go with you," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside him. "But you need to tell me everything." The man nodded, as if this was exactly the outcome he had been expecting. "We'll explain everything on the way." James followed the man out of his house and toward the black SUV, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the quiet night. Behind him, Monica stood frozen, watching in horror as the door slammed shut. She had tried to warn him, but now it was too late. As the SUV's engine roared to life, James' mind raced with questions. He had no idea what he had gotten himself into, but he knew that this was only the beginning. The truth he had been seeking was just out of reach, and whatever happened next would change everything. As the vehicle pulled away, James could only wonder, what had he really gotten himself into? And what was waiting for him on the other side? This shocking revelation. The drive seemed endless, the sound of the SUV's engine a constant hum that seemed to press against James's temples. His hands were clenched tightly in his lap, his thoughts racing. The man in the suit, who had introduced himself only as Mr. Collins, had remained eerily silent since they had left his house. The only sound was the occasional clicking of the vehicle's indicators and the soft rustle of the leather seats. James had so many questions, so many things he wanted to know. But the man had said very little about what was really going on. He had hinted at something dangerous, something far larger than a woman with a flat tire. He had talked about an organization, but what kind of organization was this? And what did they want from him? After what felt like an eternity, the SUV finally slowed, its headlights cutting through the night. The vehicle turned off the main road, following a narrow, dimly lit path that led into the woods. James's stomach twisted in knots. Everything about this situation felt wrong. He had gone from being a man helping a stranger on the side of the road to being swept into some dark mystery he didn't understand. The SUV came to a stop in front of a large, isolated building. It was old, its brick walls covered in ivy, with a high fence that ran around the perimeter. There were no signs of life. No lights in the windows, no movement around the building. It was as though they had driven straight into the heart of nowhere. Mr. Collins turned to James and gave him a brief look before stepping out of the SUV. James hesitated but followed suit. His legs felt shaky, his mind still reeling from everything that had happened. "Come inside," Mr. Collins instructed as he led James toward the large, heavy doors of the building. "It's time you learned the truth." James followed him inside, his heart pounding louder with every step. The inside of the building was just as cold and imposing as the outside. The walls were bare, the air thick with silence. It felt like a place designed to keep secrets, and James was about to uncover some of them. They passed through several empty corridors, their footsteps echoing off the concrete floors. Finally, they stopped in front of a metal door. Mr. Collins turned to James, his face unreadable. "This is where it all starts," he said simply. He pushed the door open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. Inside, there was a single table, and on it, several large files and a computer screen. But what caught James's attention was the woman sitting at the table, her face obscured by shadows. As they entered, she looked up, her eyes locking onto James. For a moment, he didn't recognize her, but then it hit him. This was the woman he had helped on the side of the road. The same woman whose flat tire had set everything into motion. "Sit down," she said, her voice low and steady. "We need to talk." James felt his legs move before he could even think about it. He found a chair and sat down, his eyes never leaving the woman. She looked much different now, more calculating, more dangerous. The kindness he had seen in her earlier was gone, replaced by a coldness that sent a chill through his entire body. "I know you have questions," she continued, her tone almost amused. "But first, let me explain who I really am." James swallowed, trying to keep his voice steady. "You're not just a woman with a flat tire, are you?" She smiled, a faint, dangerous grin. "No, I'm not. But that's how you saw me, wasn't it? Just a stranger, someone who needed help. But you've unknowingly become a part of something much bigger. And now, there's no turning back." James felt a wave of panic rise in his chest. "What is this? Who are you people?" The woman leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "We're an organization. We deal with people who think they're above the law, people who misuse their power and their influence. And you, James, have just made a very valuable ally." "Ally," James repeated, his mind struggling to keep up. "I don't even know what's going on. I just helped someone on the road." "Exactly," she said, her voice growing colder. "That's what makes you special. You did something good without knowing who the person was. You didn't ask questions. You simply helped. And now you're part of a bigger game. You've crossed paths with the wrong people, and you need to make a choice. Will you help us take down those who misuse their power, or will you turn away and walk back into your old life?" James sat back, his mind racing. He had never expected any of this. 1 minute, he was helping a woman change a flat tire. And now, he was sitting in a room with people who seemed to be part of some secret organization, ready to involve him in something he didn't understand. "I'm just a normal guy," James said quietly, feeling the weight of the situation settle on his shoulders. "Why me? Why did you pick me?" The woman smiled again, but this time, there was a hint of something darker behind her eyes. "You were in the right place at the right time, and that's all we need." James could feel the walls closing in, the weight of their gaze on him. He had no idea what to do next. He couldn't back out now, not after everything that had happened. He had been thrown into something he couldn't escape. "Make your choice," the woman said, her voice sharp. "You can walk away and forget about this, or you can help us and become part of something that will change everything." James took a deep breath, his mind spinning. He didn't know what to choose. But one thing was clear: his life would never be the same again. The decision was his.